Emma Grede is a perfect example of how the myth of the American dream becomes gendered and racialized into the myth of the pick-me. And the myth of the pick-me goes something like this. It is this idea that if you work hard enough, if you are in the right rooms, if you look good enough and you present yourself in a particular kind of way, if you sound good enough, and as long as you are highly visible in the exact perfected way that only people want you visible as, not too much of anything else, then that is going to lead to people noticing you. That is going to lead to you getting that job, that promotion, that success, and that wealth. Welcome everyone, it is your host Iman, and today I'm feeling particularly grounded and that I'm coming to the realization that for me, what success looks like and feels like is being able to have a home and a space where I can welcome and host my loved ones in. As I've mentioned every week, I recently moved to Atlanta at the beginning of the year, and I literally had spent no time in Atlanta. The first time that I had come here was to interview for the job that I now have as an assistant professor. And the second time was to look for an apartment and found the apartment that I'm in right now. But I was just thinking, I have now been here. We're about to cross into May. It is going to be 5 months essentially since I've been here. And I'm just feeling so grateful that in that time, I just get emotional thinking about it. I just have been feeling so grateful that during this time, I've never have felt like particularly lonely in this new city. And that is because I have had so many friends and loved ones and family, and friends feels like a shallow word for some of the people in my life, but I will just say that all family, friends are family. But I've had folks come to my space and visit me and spend time with me and lay their eyes on me and want to make sure that I am okay. And I just think I must have been doing something good up until this point where I can move to a new place, and the love and the connections and the intimacies that I have formed in my previous homes immediately make an effort to come and see me in my new one. So I'm just feeling very grounded in that, very emotional, being made to feel very emotional by that. And just feeling really, really blessed, alhamdulillah. And that feeling of knowing what success looks like and feels like to me is actually a perfect segue to our grounding question today, which is the myth of starting with yourself, ? Which every episode is a question, but I'm just placing a question mark on the end of this. And why so much conversation around this question of what it means to start with yourself when it comes to discussions of work-life balance and success and wealth has all been triggered by a book titled Starting with Yourself by Emma Grede and the press run that she has been going on and the kinds of things that she has been saying about what leads to women having successful careers and successful work-life balances. So she's been making her rounds on all the talk shows, on all the podcasts, and stirring up a lot of controversy for this book, again, titled Starting with Yourself, by saying things like women get in the way of their own success by working from their home, and that in order to be successful, you have to be in the right rooms, you have to be seen by people. She's on there talking about networking and, how to build a business and how to build a brand. Emma is the business partner to people like Khloe Kardashian and Good American, and also with Kim Kardashian and Skims. And so she's giving a very bootstrap narrative. I remember when Kim Kardashian got a bunch of flack 2 years ago, right? Because they asked her, what advice would you give women today? And she said, work hard. Nobody wants to work hard anymore. So what Emma Grede is doing in this moment is cycling a narrative that we are all very familiar with, and that is the narrative of essentially a bootstrap narrative, that success and wealth for women is determined by their work ethic, by the rooms that they're in, the people that they know, that this is how you become somebody like her, a millionaire, with proximity to the kind of wealth and circles and celebrity that she has. And the bootstrap narrative that she's going around peddling as a Black woman who has a white mother and a Black father who is from the UK is actually one that we have heard very often, and is coming at a time when it's becoming obvious to everyone around that working hard does not equal success and wealth. But as a scholar of religion, I see this phenomenon of starting with yourself, of Emma Grede, and of the backlash that she is receiving, particularly by Black women, is the perfect example of how myth functions in society. So I want to talk about two things today. First, what exactly is the function of a myth? And two, as a scholar of Black history and of Black thought, how we have never been limited to the particular myths that get told to us by those from above us. So first, what is a myth? Here I'm drawing on this short encyclopedia article by Keys Bowl in the Encyclopedia of Religion from 2005. I will link it in the show notes. But one thing that he pulls out in terms of what is the function of a myth in society is that he points out that myths have always functioned to support and uphold class distinction and class hierarchy. Whether it be now, whether it be in indigenous Aztec societies, things like myths have always been tales of power, tales that tell people what kind of social roles that they should have, and that those social roles and that those stories are ordained and are sacred. And if there's one thing that American capitalism is built on and that we know is the myth of the American dream. Now, what I think is just so interesting about Emma Grede and this start with yourself narrative in this particular moment is that, yes, this is a myth of the American dream, but I think what her book really shows is how this myth gets gendered and racialized and is then particularly directed at Black women and women of color. And I have long thought that this myth of the American dream takes on a particularly gendered and racialized form when it comes to the kinds of discourses and narratives that are targeted at Black women. And I've always thought of this as the myth of the pick-me. Emma Grede is a perfect example of how the myth of the American dream becomes gendered and racialized into the myth of the pick-me. And the myth of the pick-me, in my anthropological observation, goes something like this. It is this idea that if you work hard enough, if you are in the right rooms, if you look good enough and you present yourself in a particular kind of way, if you sound good enough, and as long as you are highly visible in the exact perfected way that only people want you visible as, not too much of anything else, then that is going to lead to people noticing you. That is going to lead to you getting that job, that promotion, that success, and that wealth. And it is a myth that is predicated on the idea that proximity to wealth leads to wealth, when we know that that is not true. Generational wealth leads to wealth. And it also takes a really sinister kind of spin in the way that it gets also funneled into romantic and dating relationships. This idea that if you are in the right rooms, a man will come and pluck you from obscurity, give you the life, a rich man will come and pluck you from obscurity and give you the kinds of wealth and resources that you have dreamed of or that you see others having or you see other white women having. And what this myth of the pick-me, right? The Black woman who is in the right room that's going to be picked for that job. The Black woman and the woman of color who's in that white right room who is going to get picked by that potential partner, that potential suitor. What those myths do is that it makes capitalism seem benevolent to Black women. And this is a really important myth, right? This idea that capitalist society will extend its generosity and its benevolence to Black women, despite all of the things that we hear all the time that tell us the exact opposite. That you're going to be the one who's special. You're going to be the one who's picked if you just do these right things. If you just start with yourself. And what this myth does, and is aligned so perfectly with capitalism, is that it makes success and wealth a question of individuality. Start with yourself, rather than thinking about a discussion about success and wealth and what impedes it and what limits it to looking at a systemic and structural level, right? It keeps you looking at the individual so you don't look above at the systemic. So when Emma Grede is all over my timeline, what I think about is, wow, she is not saying anything new, right? She is just repeating this myth of the pick-me, this myth of the American dream, and just regurgitating it into this hyper-branded packaging. We quite literally swim in the waters of the material that allows Emma Grede to make a book that tells women, particularly telling Black women and Black women audiences, that if they work hard enough, if that they are visible enough, if they show up to the office enough, that they are going to be picked for those opportunities, that their visibility is going to lead to success and wealth, when we know for a fact that that is not true. As many people have been pointing out, and I'll just repeat the stats, she is coming out with this book in a time where between 300 and 600,000 Black women have left the workforce, been made to leave the workforce In 2025 alone, which was the biggest in terms of demographics, the biggest drop compared to anyone else, of course, we know that Black women get paid 63 to 65 cents on the dollar to white men. And I hate to bring up Kamala, I hate to bring up Stacey Abrams, but let's just use them as an example, right? They were propped up as these representatives of being the perfected Black woman, the perfected Black woman who shows up in the right ways, who has all of the qualifications, who works the hardest, is visible and doing all of the right things in the right rooms. But guess what? Still not picked. So we have seen time and time again, and if we just want to look in the past 3 to 5 years, we've seen over and over again, Black women go through extremely public rituals of humiliation where they are the most qualified, they are the most visible, but yet again, they are still not chosen. So therefore, your success and your wealth have nothing to do with how hard you work. If Emma Grede would have done this press run, I think about 5 years ago, it probably would have been more successful than it is right now. But she is facing huge backlash, at least on the side of the internet that I have consumed. Now, I have no idea if white women or other audiences are eating this up in this moment. But what I know for a fact is that people are sick of it. They are sick of hearing the myth of the American dream, and they are sick of hearing the particular gendered and racialized articulation of the myth of the American dream, which is the myth of the pick me, that if you are a Black woman in the right spaces, you will be picked for that job by that rich person. So as a scholar of religion, I look at Emma Grede and I look at this myth of starting with yourself, and I'm able to see it as a myth because I can see the way in which this particular narrative upholds class distinctions, that allows the idea that if you are of the masses and you just work harder, that you too will make it to the top and be wealthy. When the reality is, if you are of the masses and you work hard, all you're doing is making the wealthy more wealthy. But also, as a scholar of religion, the backlash that Emma Grede is facing right now because of her use of the myth of start with yourself is actually giving me so much hope in society. Because another thing that this piece by Keys Bowles points out is that in order for society to change, the myths that we say, the narratives that become sacred, also have to change. You don't get changes in society without changes of myths. And what the backlash that Emma Grede is facing right now is showing that myths are changing, that the sacrality associated with particular myths, the myths of the American dream, the myth of the pick-me, the myths that are necessary for capitalist exploitation are starting to change on a mass scale. The lack of success of Emma Grede's press run in Black media is a recession indicator, but it is also an indicator of late-stage capitalism, but also an indicator that people are thinking beyond the myths that have been fed to us. So it actually makes me extremely excited, and to just take it away from like a hyper focus on Emma Grede and what she is doing in her Start With Yourself book. There are 1,000 Emma Gredes that have told us the exact same thing over and over again. So it's not even about dismissing this particular person and whatever she represents, whoever she's married to, whatever. I truly actually don't know much about her. She's just a manifestation of something that we have been told for centuries. And it is the backlash that she is facing that is making me hopeful that we're starting to come up with new myths and new narratives for this society. And to take it back to the Keys Bowles piece on myth, he ends this article talking about how this idea that our contemporary modern, quote unquote, secular society is no longer structured by myth in the same way that pre-modern societies were. He says that this is absolutely not true, that every society is predicated on particular kinds of fiction. And we cannot see the kinds of myths that we associate as being sacred in our contemporary moment because we don't actually have enough historical distance to be able to see the kinds of fictions that determine our realities in this moment. But this is where I depart from Bowles and his his work, because his kind of ending of this article, of this encyclopedia entry of what myth is, ends on the idea that we're too close to actually see in this moment the myths and the fictions that structure our reality, when actually that is not true. Folks who have been a part of the masses have always been able to point out the myths and the fictions that prop up society, and have never allowed those particular myths to determine the potentiality of their being. It's actually one of the reasons why I love, and to get to the second portion of the question of our grounding question today, that is why I love being a scholar of Black nationalism in particular, because it is to be a scholar of Black imagination and how Black folks have tried to move in a way that creates new myths about who we are and what we represent, which forces one to ask, what kinds of myths are possible that exceed and are not boiled down to capitalism? And this is where I'm going to bring in, which I, always do, my research on Black nationalism. So one group that I study is called the Republic of New Afrika. They originated in 1968 during the Black Power movement, and they were a Black nationalist organization that wanted 5 states in the South to be given to Black people as a form of reparations to establish an independent Black nation. They were so organized, so methodical in their articulation of what the economics of this new nation would be, of how they would appeal to international law, and the kind of philosophical perspective that would be the foundation of their nation. And one of the things that I researched, that I talk about, I have an article that's going to come out about this, is how the Republic of New Afrika understood itself as not just trying to create a new nation state. So they wanted the Republic of New Afrika to be across South Carolina, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, to be an independent Black nation. But they said that they would not be like other civilizations. So, quick segue. I watched the show Paradise with Sterling K. Brown, and it is your classic post-apocalyptic kind of move where people during the end of the world go down to a bunker to save themselves, and they create a new civilization, a new society, and try to keep everyone else out of it. And in this most recent season, everyone was going crazy because there's this flashback scene where the president is telling the architect of this bunker, you know what every civilization has in common? They all have in common that they've all failed, and they've all failed because of their greed. And I thought to myself, oh my God, that's crazy that this is something being brought up in Paradise, because this is exactly what Amari Obadeli, the president of the Republic of New Afrika, also said what would distinguish the Republic of New Afrika, this independent Black nation he was organizing towards in the South, from every other civilization. He himself, like the president in Paradise, to draw a kind of historical pop culture connection, said that what would distinguish the Republic of New Afrika from every other civilization before it that had come to an end was that they were not going to define their success based on their material accumulation, their material extraction, and their material exploitation. He said, we will have failed if we understand success as every person in our society, or every Black person, having the nicest car, the nicest washing machine, the nicest technology. He said that if we understand success through explicitly wealth under a capitalist mindset, we have failed. Instead, what the Republic of New Afrika wanted to do was provide every citizen, every Black person, every descendant of enslaved people in the United States with their 5 basic human needs: housing, education, health, school, and food. And with their needs met, he felt that that would give Black folks the time, the mental capacity, the space for a spiritual development and potentiality to come up with an entirely new mode of being human. He wanted people's human basic needs to be met so that they could come up with new ways of being that exceeded the limited modes of being placed upon them by capitalist exploitation. So again, we have this moment in history, we have this group that organized towards trying to imagine and creating an opportunity for new myths, new modes of being humans, new kinds of fictions to come into play that exceeded capitalism, that exceeded the idea that your success and wealth looks like starting with yourself and having millions and millions of dollars. And I frequently think about this moment in Amari Obadeli's writing because it creates a particular kind of standard for me to be able to determine for myself what success looks like beyond the grammars of capitalism. Of course, I want my basic human needs met. Of course, I do not want to live paycheck to paycheck. Of course, I want all of my friends and family's basic human needs met too. Of course, I want those things. But I know because I researched the Republic of New Afrika because I study Black nationalism, that capitalism is not the only system in which that can be a possibility. So therefore, I have to determine for myself what success is going to look like as much as I can without using capitalism as my grammars, as the punctuation of what my life could be and the potentiality for it. And I think this is a realization that a lot of people my age, a lot of millennials, are making in this moment, who have been told if you just work hard enough, you are going to be on track to be a millionaire. You can have everything you want in life. You can pull yourself up by the bootstraps. You're going to be picked. You're going to go viral. You're going to be famous. You're going to be a millionaire. Now, we're starting to see this myth, and particularly another myth of the influencer being extremely, extremely important and perpetuating the myth of the millennial pick-me, in which we're all just one post away from going viral, having brand deals, and being a millionaire. When we know that's not the case, right? We know that the algorithm picks certain people. It's not about how much content you put out there. It's not about just posting 10 times a day. The algorithm works as an extension of capitalism. So we know it's not just about being visible, showing up and working hard, or starting with yourself. As the backlash to Emma Grede is showing, right, that people are divesting from this myth, which makes me wonder, what are the new myths that we're going to start turning towards? But guess what? We don't have to recreate those on our own. We have entire histories. This is why I feel like being a historian of Black nationalism, of thinking about Black nationalist thought, is so important, and why I also think it's so important to talk about it, not just in academic settings, but in public settings, because we have architectures for people who have imagined the world beyond capitalist grammars. We just have to go back to and think with them. And of course, put our own spin on it. I often joke, I feel like people don't realize that to be a professor, right? I am 31 years old. I've essentially been in higher education since I was 18. And like I briefly wasn't a student in higher education. I worked in higher education administration, but I have been in the higher education sphere since I was 18. I have a bachelor's degree. I have 2 master's degrees that I got on the way to getting my PhD, as well as also another master's degree. I have 5 degrees, right? Over $1 million worth of higher education that I needed in order to get the job that I have now as a tenure track assistant professor. Do you know what the starting salary is for a tenure track assistant professor? It's something like $75,000, somewhere between like $69,000 and $79,000. And you might be clutching your pearls, because what other profession do you go to where you need an entire PhD and the starting salary is not at least 6 figures? This is why academia, I think, is such a rich place for this kind of thinking, because people who go into academia are going in already knowing that they have to have a metric of success that does not equal just wealth. There is hardly a pipeline from going to being an assistant professor to being a millionaire, right? So you have to engage your job and be interested in your job for something beyond just becoming a millionaire. And that kind of perspective, right, makes you realize that your success is not just based on starting with yourself and becoming a millionaire. Like for myself, I think I want my success to be impact and to be education. I think in the world that we live in now, it is absolutely fundamental that people understand what religion is and that they understand spirituality and intellectualism together as a part of being human. There is not a valuing of this kind of language, even though there is a constant seeking of it. People want it. People need it, right? I think that is a fundamental part of understanding what it means to be human, what it means to coexist amongst other humans, is to understand how religion works, is to understand the intersections of the spiritual and of the intellectual as a fundamental part of the human experience. And so if I can have an impact on bringing that to a wider audience, then that is going to be what success looks like for me. If I can invite people who are not in liberal arts classrooms into the same kind of conversation that you would get if you were paying $50,000 a year to sit in one of my classrooms, if I can bring people into that conversation for free, success, baby. I got it. Success. That's what success feels like. If I can create a space that functions as an intellectual home for people to have that kind of conversation, success. That's how I'm defining success. Now hold me to it. And that's what I'm finding grounding in today. Especially I'm really trying to be on my social media game. If you follow me on social media, you know, you have seen it there. I'm trying to post every day. I'm trying to use it as a marketing tool to bring as many people into the kinds of conversations that I am trying to create a space for here. And I've had to really like check myself that I am not feeling like what I'm doing is pointless because I'm not getting 10,000 views on a video, which is like also kind of crazy. It's like, girl, you like low-key just kind of started to like relax. But at the same time, I have to constantly remind myself that I'm not going to allow a number, an algorithm that already deprioritizes the kind of content and conversations that I'm having. I'm not going to let that algorithmic number be the defining quality of my success. I can't. I will lose my mind if I allow capitalist metrics of algorithms and views to determine what I feel like is success. I will literally stop doing this tomorrow. So I have to, for myself, create new metrics of what I think success looks like, what I think work-life balance looks like. Because I am somebody, and another influencer that I love, her name is Kendra Austin, I believe. She said, the thing is with Emma Grady's thing is I am also somebody who dreams of labor, but I dream of labor in a way that is not about capitalism and hyper-individualism. It's about community. It's about having a work-life balance and an idea of success that also measures up to the kind of nervous system that I'm having. So I love her work and I love those posts because I too am someone that dreams of success. If you meet me in life, to know me is to know sometimes I might work a little too, might be a little too obsessive over things. So all that to say is it's never a question of whether or not people want to work hard, whether or not I want to work hard, is that we just have to have different values for what we think the return on that hard work should be. And by having that different value, we're going to be able to see that actually it's not about starting with yourself. There's a system that already determines where you're going to start and where you're going to end. Don't believe that myth that they have shoved down Black millennial and women of color millennials' throats of the myth of the pick me, that if you're in the right spaces, you're going to be the one who gets picked. You're going to be the one who's wealthy. You're going to be the one who's going to make it into that boardroom. No, we have to have different grammars outside of capitalism. But we have histories and we have presence of people who are doing that very thing. And I'm trying to wade in those waters. I'm trying to be there with them. With that, I am leaving this episode feeling, I normally end up feeling very tired, but I'm actually feeling very energized by this conversation because I think it was also just an affirmation for me of how and why I'm going to keep going and how and why I am going to determine what success looks like for myself. How I'm not going to also hyper focus on starting with myself like Emma Grede is telling me to do, but focus on knowing how the system determines how I see myself and how I see success, turning to Black thought for visions that have imagined that success otherwise, listening to folks who are speaking the same language as me, and just, again, trying to be here, make an impact where we can have conversations at the intersection of the spiritual and the intellectual, because I fundamentally think that that is a way that we get out. That is a way that we reimagine what it means to be human on this earth. So with that, I leave you all, and I want to thank you all. This is the 9th episode. We're 9 weeks strong. If you love me, if you want to do something nice for me, recommend this show to a friend, or rate it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or follow me on social media, whether it be Instagram or TikTok at IMANABDK, or send me a DM on either of those platforms with a listener question. I love doing episodes according to listener questions because it makes me feel like I'm having a real conversation with you all. And also follow us on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube at IMANABDK. If you just search that, then I will come up. And I love you all dearly. And I just want to thank you all so much. I've gotten so much love from the posts, from the reels, and what have you. And I want you to know that if you comment, I'm like going to get emotional thinking about this. If you comment on anything that I post, when you send me a message, when you do anything, I like screenshot that and I put that in an affirmations folder as a means of knowing that I am on a path towards success that goes beyond just algorithms and views and money and what have you. So all that to say is that to me is the currency of my success. And I just really appreciate it. And I'm just so looking forward to seeing you guys and being with you guys here next week. So I will see you next Monday. Bye-bye.